Tonight, we're going to explore how Vikings kept their houses warm during freezing winters or when snow pressed against the walls, daylight shrank to a pale ribbon on the horizon, and the wind seemed determined to find every weakness in a roof. You arrive in a small Norse settlement at the edge of winter. The ground beneath your boots is hard, the grass has vanished under frost, and a grey sky hangs low above a cluster of long, dark houses. Smoke drifts uncertainly from openings in the roofs. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks once and then apparently decides that even barking requires too much energy in this weather. The cold here is not decorative. It is not the pleasant sort of cold that belongs on postcards beside steaming mugs. It settles into timber, stiffens leather, freezes water, and turns every ordinary household task into a quiet calculation about warmth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, you can post your location and your local time in the comments. It is always interesting to imagine people listening from warm bedrooms, distant cities, quiet villages, or perhaps somewhere considerably colder than the Viking world itself. Now, dim the lights and step carefully toward the doorway. The first thing you notice is how low the building seems. A Viking house does not rise proudly into the winter sky with great glass windows and lofty ceilings. That would be an excellent way to heat the atmosphere instead of the family. The structure crouches close to the earth. You reach out and touch the outside wall. It is not smooth. Depending on where you are in the Norse world, your fingers might meet rough timber, stacked stone, packed earth, or thick blocks of turf. The wall feels heavy and slightly damp beneath your hand. Frost clings to the edges. Already, without entering, you begin to understand one of the most important facts about surviving a northern winter. Warmth begins with the house itself. A fire matters, of course. Wool matters. Food matters. But if the building leaks heat constantly, then every armful of fuel becomes part of a losing battle. Viking builders understand this without needing thermometers, insulation ratings, or a cheerful contractor explaining that your entire wall must be replaced. They learn through generations of experience. In Iceland, where large trees are scarce, houses often rely heavily on turf. In parts of Norway and Sweden, timber becomes more important. In other places, stone supports walls or foundations. There is no single Viking house copied endlessly across the northern world. Climate, landscape, wealth, local materials, and tradition all shape what you see. Records and archaeology confirm that Norse domestic buildings vary greatly from region to region, but one principle appears again and again: protect the interior from wind and preserve as much heat as possible. You bend toward the doorway. It is smaller than you might expect. That is useful. Every opening allows warm air to escape and cold air to enter, so doors are practical rather than grand. Windows, when present at all, are nothing like the broad glass panes of a modern house. Glass is expensive and uncommon in ordinary homes. Light usually enters through doorways, roof openings, or small gaps. This means the interior can be dim even during the day. For a moment, it feels as though you're entering a cave made by human hands. Your eyes adjust slowly. The change in temperature is immediate, though perhaps not dramatic. The house is not tropical. No one inside is wandering around in a linen shirt complaining that the fire is too strong. Instead, the air feels protected. The wind has disappeared. That alone makes an enormous difference. Outside, moving air strips warmth from your skin. Inside, even cool air feels gentler because it is still. You hear the soft crackle of a fire farther within. There is also another sound, a faint rustle, wool against wood, someone shifting on a bench, a spoon touching the side of a bowl. Life gathers inward during winter. Space matters differently here. Modern people often imagine comfort as having more room. Bigger kitchens, larger bedrooms, high ceilings, an extra room for objects purchased with great confidence and then never used. In a Viking winter, empty space is something you must warm. Smaller, lower spaces can be easier to keep comfortable. The longhouse is often divided by function, status, and household activity, but people spend much of their time where heat is available. You notice the roof first. It slopes steeply above you, supported by heavy timbers. The underside may be darkened by years of smoke. Above the wooden structure lies material that helps keep the weather out, sometimes turf layered over birch bark or other roofing materials. That roof is doing more than stopping snow. It is part of the thermal shelter. Snow itself can even become a strange ally. A layer of snow resting on a roof may reduce heat loss because trapped air inside the snow acts as insulation. People living in cold climates have understood this principle in practical ways for thousands of years, so the winter storm that buries the landscape can also wrap the house in an accidental blanket. Not a particularly convenient blanket. Admittedly, you would still prefer wool, but it helps. A curious footnote comes from experiments with reconstructed Viking buildings. Visitors sometimes expect the interiors to be unbearably cold. Yet even modest fires and several human bodies can raise the temperature surprisingly quickly when wind is blocked and walls are thick. This does not mean the house becomes uniformly warm. Far from it. Temperature changes depending on where you sit. Near the hearth, your face may feel hot while your back remains cool. Close to the walls, the air can be chilly. Near the roof, warmer air collects among smoke and rafters. Comfort is local. You learn to choose your position carefully. There is an unspoken geography to warmth. The hearth becomes desirable territory. The doorway is less prestigious during a storm. You can imagine someone being told to sit near the entrance and immediately understanding that this is not a compliment. The scent inside is complicated. Wood smoke dominates, but beneath it you detect wool, dried herbs, leather, damp earth, cooked grain, and perhaps fish. Nothing smells neutral. The house is alive with materials. Even the walls seem to hold years of winter. You run your fingertips along a timber post polished smooth by hands. The wood is cold at first, then warms beneath your palm. That small sensation tells you something important about Viking life. Warmth is not taken for granted. It is stored, protected, shared, and constantly maintained. You do not simply press a button and expect the room to respond. Someone must gather fuel. Someone must repair the roof. Someone must block a draft. Someone must dry wet clothing. Someone must notice when a latch no longer closes properly. Survival is made of small maintenance. This is especially true in the colder parts of the Norse world. The Viking Age stretches roughly from the late 8th century into the 11th century, and Norse communities occupy landscapes ranging from relatively mild coastal regions to places where winters are long, dark, and severe. Norway's coast benefits in some areas from ocean currents that moderate temperatures. While inland valleys can become much colder, Iceland presents powerful winds and limited woodland. Greenland pushes adaptation even further. So when you say Viking winter, you're really talking about many winters. Some are wet, some are snowy, some are windy, some are bitterly dry. All demand planning. Scholars still argue over exactly how comfortable reconstructed Norse houses would have been in daily winter use. Archaeology can reveal walls, hearths, post holes, roof structures, and traces of fuel. But comfort itself leaves no neat artifact behind. You cannot excavate a person's opinion of the temperature. Researchers therefore combine archaeological evidence with experimental buildings, historical climate studies, ethnographic comparison, and practical tests. Arguments split along questions of airflow, roof design, fuel use, and how many people might occupy a space at once. A reconstructed house with tourists entering every 5 minutes does not behave exactly like a home sealed against a winter storm. Likewise, a modern experimenter wearing industrial boots is not quite living the same life as a Norse farmer in layered wool, so there is always uncertainty. That uncertainty makes the scene more interesting, not less. You stand near the wall and listen. Outside, wind brushes the roof with a low rushing sound. Inside, the noise softens. That contrast may be the greatest luxury this house provides. Shelter first, heat second. People who live in severe climates often understand that stopping the wind is as important as producing warmth. The walls are thick for a reason. In a turf house, layers of earth and vegetation contain countless pockets of trapped air. These slow the movement of heat. Turf is heavy, messy, and requires maintenance, but it is also remarkably effective in a landscape where timber may be scarce. The house almost becomes part of the ground. From a distance, its roof can appear to rise naturally from the hillside. In winter, that closeness to the earth helps stabilize the interior temperature. The soil does not swing between extremes as quickly as open air. You're living partly inside a thermal buffer. There is something quietly clever about it. There are no machinery, or no furnace, no thermostat. Just earth, wood, stone, fire, wool, and experience. Oddly enough, some Viking houses may have been warmer than poorly built European stone dwellings farther south. Stone can feel impressive, but without good insulation it absorbs cold readily. A thick turf wall, humble as it appears, may offer better protection against sudden temperature changes, so the northern farmer inside a grassy house might occasionally have been more comfortable than a wealthier person, shivering beside a grand stone wall. History enjoys that kind of joke. You move farther inside. The cold iron of the door latch is no longer in your hand. Your fingers begin to loosen. Someone passes you a wooden cup. Steam rises faintly. The drink might be weak ale, warm water, broth, or something equally practical. Heat enters the body as well as the room. Food becomes part of winter warmth. So does clothing. So does movement. Everything works together. A Viking household does not rely on one brilliant solution. It relies on layers. A well-shaped building blocks wind. Thick walls slow heat loss. The roof traps warmth. Fire adds energy. Clothing keeps that energy close to the body. Food provides calories. People gather together. The system is simple only when viewed from a distance. In reality, it is the result of countless small decisions. Where should the doorway face? How thick should the turf be? How much fuel must be stored? When should repairs begin? How many animals can be sheltered nearby? Which clothes need drying first? These questions are ordinary, but in winter they become serious. A badly timed mistake can mean days of discomfort. Several mistakes together can become dangerous. You begin to see why preparation starts long before snow arrives. Winter survival is not really a winter activity. It is a year-round habit. The house you stand inside is a record of those habits. Every beam was chosen, every wall was raised, every layer of turf was cut and placed, every gap was noticed eventually, usually because someone sat beside it and complained. Some parts of history are kings, battles, ships, and famous names. Others are a person stuffing moss into a drafty crack because their left foot is freezing. That quieter history is often closer to daily life. You listen as the fire gives a soft pop. A spark rises and disappears into the smoky air. Around you, the household continues its evening. Someone works wool between their fingers. Someone checks a wooden tool. Someone speaks quietly. No one seems impressed by the engineering of the house. Why would they be to them? This is simply how you survive. The roof holds. The walls block the wind. The fire burns. For tonight, that is enough. Outside, frost thickens across the settlement. Inside, The air remains still, smoky, dim, and protected, and as your eyes grow accustomed to the darkness, you begin to understand that Viking warmth does not come from defeating winter. It comes from making the cold work harder to reach you. You stand outside a Norse house while winter presses hard against the settlement, and the wall beside you suddenly becomes much more interesting than a wall has any right to be. At first glance, it looks almost primitive. There is no neat brickwork, no polished plaster, no tidy modern insulation hidden behind painted panels. Instead, you see a thick mass of turf, timber, stone, and packed earth, arranged with the kind of practical intelligence that comes from living where cold weather has very little respect for optimism. You place your palm against the surface. It feels rough, uneven, and deeply solid. That thickness is the point. A winter house in the Norse world needs to slow the escape of warmth while reducing the number of places where icy air can squeeze inside. The people building it may not speak in terms of thermal conductivity, but they understand the problem perfectly well. Like if your wall is thin, the cold wins quickly. If your wall is thick, layered, and protected from wind, the cold has to work much harder. And in a severe winter, making the cold work harder is practically a domestic art form. The exact construction depends on where you are. In heavily wooded parts of Scandinavia, timber is a valuable building material. Logs, planks, posts, and wooden frames can form important parts of a house. In places where forests are less generous, builders become more dependent on turf and stone. Local landscape decides architecture with ruthless efficiency. You build with what you can obtain. Transporting enormous quantities of material over difficult terrain is expensive in labour, so people learn to turn nearby resources into shelter. In Iceland, this becomes particularly important. Wood is limited, especially as settlement expands and accessible forests decline. Turf, on the other hand, is abundant, so you watch workers cut sections of grass-covered soil from the ground. The pieces are heavy. Each one contains roots woven tightly through earth, almost like a natural fabric. When stacked carefully, these turf blocks produce walls that can become remarkably thick. Some are built in layers or arranged in patterns designed to improve stability. Stone may form a base, helping keep vulnerable organic material away from the wettest ground. The result is not merely a pile of dirt, it is a carefully assembled barrier. You crouch close to one freshly cut block. The scent is rich and earthy, even in cold weather. Moist soil clings beneath the grass roots. Your fingers press into the surface and meet resistance. Those tangled roots are useful. They bind the turf together. The wall becomes stronger than loose soil would ever be. Records from archaeology confirm that turf construction becomes a defining feature of many Norse buildings in Iceland, where it remains part of architectural tradition long beyond the Viking Age. The material performs especially well because earth changes temperature more slowly than exposed air. When freezing wind strikes the outside, the cold does not instantly pass through a thick turf wall. Heat from inside must travel gradually through many layers. Meanwhile, the air trapped in the structure helps resist the rapid heat movement. It is a natural form of insulation. Nothing glamorous, very effective. You can almost hear a modern home designer trying to sell it as an exclusive ecological innovation. The Viking farmer would probably stare for a moment and then return to repairing the sheep pen. Timber walls behave differently. Wood is naturally better at slowing heat transfer than bare stone, and well-fitted wooden construction can create a strong shelter. But timber brings another challenge. Gaps, a small crack between boards, may seem harmless in summer. In winter, it can become a miniature highway for freezing air. So builders use filling materials where necessary. Moss, clay, wool waste, plant matter, or similar substances can help close gaps depending on local practice and available resources. You press a little moss between two pieces of timber. It compresses easily. The idea is wonderfully straightforward. If air is entering through a crack, put something in the crack. Human civilization occasionally achieves greatness through solutions that require almost no explanation. The details of wall construction can be surprisingly sophisticated. In some houses, internal timber frames carry much of the roof weight, while outer turf walls provide insulation and weather protection. This matters because thick turf is heavy, extremely heavy, especially when wet. A roof and wall system must therefore balance warmth with structural survival. No one wants insulation that quietly collapses into the living area during dinner. Stone becomes important in foundations and lower wall sections because it resists moisture better than untreated earth or timber. You notice flat stones arranged near ground level. They keep parts of the structure stable while helping separate organic materials from damp soil. Moisture is an enemy almost as persistent as cold. A wall that stays soaked can deteriorate. Wood can rot. Turf can slump. Frozen moisture can expand and damage surfaces. So maintaining warmth also means controlling water. Winter architecture is never merely about temperature. It is about wind, rain, snow, drainage, smoke, weight, and the awkward fact that nature likes to attack from several directions at once. You walk along the outer wall. It is wider than you expected. Some turf walls can become more than a simple vertical barrier. They have bulk, depth, and even a slight inward or outward slope depending on construction. That mass creates stability. It also creates a strange visual effect. The house seems less like an object placed on the landscape and more like a landscape persuaded to become a house. Grass may grow across the exterior. In warmer months, the walls can turn green. By winter, the vegetation becomes dull and flattened, but the building still seems rooted in the ground. Oddly enough, turf walls can require a tremendous amount of material. Building even a modest structure may mean cutting large areas of sod. A warm home, therefore, leaves a visible mark on the surrounding land. The house is literally made from pieces of the countryside. There is something almost poetic about that, although the person hauling wet turf probably finds it considerably less poetic. Each block may weigh enough to make your shoulders reconsider their loyalty. You help lift one. It lands with a soft, heavy thud. Again another, and another. Wall building becomes slow physical work. You begin to appreciate why maintenance matters so much. Once a sturdy wall exists, you do not casually ignore it. Cracks are repaired. Damaged turf is replaced. Edges are strengthened. Water paths are watched. A poorly maintained wall loses not only structural strength but thermal performance. The winter wind needs only one weakness. You move closer to a corner of the house. Corners are difficult. Any place where surfaces meet creates opportunities for gaps. Builders therefore pay close attention to overlaps and joints. Turf blocks can be arranged so seams do not line up continuously from one side to another, reducing the chance of a straight passage for air. It is the same basic principle used in many forms of masonry. Stagger the joints, break the path, keep the weather guessing. A council decree does not need to explain this for people to understand it. Generations of builders learn by watching which houses stay warmer, which walls fail, and which families spend every winter complaining about drafts. Practical knowledge spreads through communities. A good builder is valuable, so is an observant farmer. The house becomes a collection of inherited solutions. You now place your hand on a section of exposed stone. It feels colder than the turf nearby. Stone is strong and durable, but it conducts heat more readily than dry insulating organic material. This is why a house made largely from stone can feel surprisingly cold unless wall thickness, internal lining, or other insulation helps. In the North Atlantic, stone is often used strategically rather than romantically. It supports, it anchors, it resists wet ground. But where thermal protection is needed, turf offers important advantages. Scholars bicker over the exact thermal performance of different Viking Age wall systems. because surviving archaeological remains rarely preserve every original layer perfectly. Turf decomposes, timber disappears, buildings are rebuilt. Later occupants alter walls, excavations reveal foundations and traces of structure. But reconstructing the exact thickness, moisture level, internal lining, and maintenance condition of a wall can be difficult. No agreement has been reached on whether every reconstruction seen today matches everyday Viking Age practice with complete accuracy. Some experimental buildings perform very well, others reveal problems with dampness or ventilation. The debate is not about whether thick walls help. They clearly do. The uncertainty lies in exactly how particular houses were assembled and how consistently they performed over decades of use. You step inside one such building and notice another trick. The wall does not have to provide warmth by itself. Interior fittings can create additional layers between your body and the cold surface. Wooden benches, storage chests, hanging textiles, animal skins, and household objects all change how air circulates near the walls. A woven hanging can reduce the sensation of cold radiating from a surface. A bench keeps you from sitting directly against damp earth or stone. A chest placed along a wall creates a small pocket of still air behind it. None of these objects is a modern insulation system, but together they contribute to comfort. Warmth emerges from accumulation. Small advantages stack up. One scandalous aside, at least by the standards of someone who enjoys a perfectly clean, modern living room, is that dirt itself can sometimes help. Packed earthen surfaces, turf banks, and organic materials may seem messy, but dry earth is useful. A spotless stone interior would not automatically be warmer. The Viking household is not trying to impress a magazine photographer. It is trying to make February survivable. You notice that the wall is thicker near certain exposed areas. Whether this is deliberate in every case is difficult to prove, but builders in windy climates naturally learn to respect direction. A house placed with its long axis, entrance, and walls responding to prevailing weather can reduce discomfort. Shelter from hills, slopes, neighbouring buildings, or natural depressions also matters. The best wall is helped enormously if the landscape shields it. So choosing where to build can be as important as choosing how to build. You stand on the windward side and feel the difference immediately. Cold air hits your cheek hard enough to make your eyes water. Then you walk around to the sheltered side. The air becomes calmer. Same temperature. Different experience. A house can use that difference. The landscape becomes part of the heating strategy. Not because it generates warmth, but because it prevents warmth from being stolen. That distinction shapes northern architecture. You keep returning to the same quiet principle. Preserve what you have. Every ember, every body, every cooking pot, every lamp, every animal, every task produces a little heat. The walls decide how long that heat remains useful. By evening, the outer surface may be crusted with frost while the inner surface stays comparatively mild. The wall does not feel warm in the modern sense. It simply refuses to become as cold as the world outside, and that's enough to matter. Your fingertips brush the rough interior. There is no decorative perfection here. There are tool marks, irregular joints, bits of grass, dark timber, and places repaired by different hands at different times. A wall may carry the labour of several generations. One person adds turf, another replaces a rotten beam, another blocks a crack, another rebuilds a corner after a wet season. The house survives because maintenance never quite stops. Then the winter wind rises again. You hear it rushing beyond the wall, low and insistent. Inside, the sound becomes muffled. The thick barrier does not silence the storm completely, but it softens it into something distant. Cold remains outside as a pressure rather than a presence. You can still sense it. You simply no longer feel it moving across your skin, and in that small difference, created by earth, roots, timber, stone, and endless patient labour, the Viking household finds one of its most dependable forms of winter warmth. You move beneath the long roof of the house and begin to notice that its shape is doing quiet work all around you. The building stretches lengthwise rather than rising upward. Its walls stay comparatively low, while the roof slopes down toward them in broad, heavy lines. Nothing about the design seems interested in wasting space. That is useful when winter settles over the settlement. Warm air rises, of course, and a very tall room gives that warmth somewhere to go where nobody is sitting. A lower interior keeps more of the useful heat closer to human bodies, tools, benches, food, and sleeping places. The longhouse is not designed around the modern dream of openness. It is designed around survival, work, storage, household hierarchy, and whatever the weather is currently trying to do to you. You stand near the centre and look toward each end. The space feels elongated, depending on the house. Internal posts may divide the interior into bays, creating a rhythm of timber supports beneath the roof. These posts help carry the immense weight above. That weight can be considerable. Roof beams support layers of wood, bark, turf, thatch, or other materials depending on region and construction. Snow can then add even more pressure. A roof must resist wind from the side and weight from above. It is less a decorative hat and more a highly stressed piece of engineering. You hear a faint creak somewhere in the rafters. Nobody looks alarmed. Wooden buildings make sounds. The beams expand, dry, bend, and settle. A longhouse in winter is not silent. It clicks, groans, and murmurs softly as fire warms one part while freezing air presses against another. The roof shape helps snow slide or settle, according to pitch and surface. A steeper roof can shed precipitation more effectively, though actual Viking Age roof angles vary across regions and building types. Builders must balance several needs. Too shallow, and moisture becomes a problem. Too steep, and construction becomes more demanding. Too weak, and one heavy snowfall may turn architecture into a deeply unpopular indoor event. Records confirm that excavated Viking Age houses often show long rectangular or slightly curved plans supported by substantial internal post systems. Some walls bow gently outward along their length, producing what archaeologists sometimes describe as a boat-like outline. You walk along such a wall and feel the curve almost without noticing it. The building widens near the middle and narrows toward the ends. It is tempting to imagine a ship turned upside down and placed on land. The comparison's elegant, perhaps a little too elegant. Not every longhouse follows the same plan, and nobody needs to believe that Norse farmers spend their evenings designing houses simply because they miss their boats. Still, the curved forms are real in many excavated structures. The geometry may help with construction, structural forces, internal organization, or inherited building traditions. Scholars still argue over exactly why certain longhouses have these bowed sides. Some emphasize practical engineering. Others point to social tradition and visual identity. Arguments split along whether shape follows structural necessity, cultural preference, or a mixture of both. As usual, the dead have declined to leave a helpful note pinned to a doorpost. You continue toward one end of the building. The temperature changes slightly. The central occupied zone tends to benefit most from human activity and fire. Outer ends can be cooler, especially if used for storage, work, or animals. This allows a long building to contain different thermal zones. Not every corner needs to be equally warm. That is important. Heating an entire large structure to one comfortable temperature would consume enormous amounts of fuel. Instead, people adapt their movements to the building. You stay near warmth when warmth matters. You use cooler spaces for goods that do not complain. Grain has very few opinions about drafty architecture. A barrel of dried fish is equally stoic. People, however, gather more strategically. You notice benches following parts of the walls. They turn the edges of the building into useful living zones without requiring separate rooms. Partitions may divide activities, but the house remains connected. Heat can move through open space instead of becoming trapped behind dozens of doors. That does not mean every Viking house is one enormous smoky hall. Layouts differ widely. Some longhouses include multiple compartments. Others combine domestic, agricultural, and storage functions. The important point is that internal organization often reflects what needs warmth and what can tolerate cold. You can almost map the household by temperature. A working area lies here, sleeping places there, stored goods farther away, animals somewhere more practical. Fire near the social heart of the building. The house functions as a gradient rather than a uniformly heated box. You look upward again. There is another important feature. The roof reaches low toward the walls, reducing the exterior surface exposed to wind compared with a much taller building of the same floor area. Wind can pull heat from a structure quickly. Every exposed surface becomes another place for warmth to escape. Keeping the profile low reduces that problem. In severe weather, the whole building appears to crouch against the landscape. There is wisdom in that posture. The house does not challenge the wind. It ducks. You step outside briefly to see the form more clearly. The long roof lies dark beneath a pale winter sky. Snow gathers along its edges. The ends of the building are narrower than the broad centre, and the whole structure seems almost aerodynamic, though nobody here would use that word. Air moves around the shape. Placement matters too. A longhouse can be positioned with attention to local slopes and prevailing winds. If one side faces the worst weather, that side may be more heavily protected. Entrances can be placed where exposure is reduced. Nearby terrain, other buildings, fences, and banks can create sheltered pockets. The settlement itself becomes a small system for managing weather. One building breaks the wind for another. A slope protects a yard. A wall shields an entrance. You begin to see why houses are rarely just isolated rectangles. They belong to a wider working landscape. Oddly enough, some excavated longhouses are impressively large. Certain elite halls stretch far beyond what an ordinary farm household needs. These great buildings serve social and political purposes as much as domestic ones. A chieftain can gather followers, host feasts, display wealth, and conduct business under a roof whose size announces importance before anyone speaks. But size creates a winter problem. More space means more air to warm. A grand hall may therefore be impressive while still forcing guests to compete politely for the best spots near the fire. Status has limits. Even powerful people must obey physics. A person seated close to the entrance may possess excellent social standing and unfortunately cold ankles. The smaller farm longhouse has different advantages. It concentrates life, work, meals, conversation, mending, preparation, and rest occur within relatively compact inhabited zones. Human bodies release heat constantly. Several people working together raise the temperature of a sheltered space. Add fire, cooking, lamps, warm food, and perhaps animals elsewhere within the building complex, and a noticeable amount of heat accumulates. The shape of the house helps keep that energy where it is useful. You step through a narrow passage between interior supports. The posts stand like a wooden skeleton. They are not merely holding up a roof. They determine how the house can be used. A wider central aisle creates movement. Side areas become places for benches and tasks. In some building traditions, roof loads pass through internal supports rather than relying entirely on outer walls. That allows the thick exterior walls to focus partly on enclosure and insulation. Structural work and thermal work can be shared among different parts of the building. The arrangement is more sophisticated than it first appears. A curious footnote lies beneath your feet. Some longhouses are slightly sunken or built into sloping ground, while others sit more fully above it. Lowering part of the floor can help reduce exposure and take advantage of the Earth's steadier temperature. But it also creates drainage problems. Water has a malicious talent for appearing precisely where you least want it. Builders must therefore think about runoff, soil, foundations, and seasonal wetness. A warm house with a flooded floor is not generally considered an improvement. You test the floor beneath your boot. It may be packed earth, clay, stone in certain areas, wooden material, or a combination. The floor is rarely warm in the modern sense. Feet therefore need protection. Shoes, socks, straw, skins, raised platforms, and benches help keep bodies away from the coldest surfaces. This is another way architecture shapes behavior. You do not lounge casually on the floor unless you particularly enjoy becoming acquainted with cold soil. The roof also controls light. Large windows would lose too much heat and are difficult to make practical without abundant glass. So interiors stay relatively dark. Your pupils widen. Firelight becomes important not only for warmth, but for vision. Tiny flames cast huge shadows across curved roof timbers. Tasks gather around the brightest areas. During the short winter day, people rely heavily on hearths and lamps. The absence of large openings gives the house a protected feeling. It also means smoke and ventilation become serious concerns. A building must preserve heat without sealing itself completely. Fire consumes oxygen. Smoke must escape. Fresh air must enter somewhere. The challenge is constant. Too much ventilation and the house grows cold. Too little, and breathing becomes miserable. There is no modern mechanical system adjusting the airflow every few seconds. Instead, roof openings, doorways, structural gaps, and controlled drafts allow air to move. No agreement has been reached on exactly how smoke exits every kind of Viking Age house. Reconstructed buildings demonstrate several possibilities. Some smoke drifts through roof vents, some escapes through doors, some leaks gradually through roofing material. The precise behavior depends on fire size, weather, roof construction, openings, and pressure differences. You can imagine winter occupants becoming extremely skilled at reading smoke. A change in wind direction matters. A badly placed gust can push smoke downward. People shift, eyes water. Someone adjusts the fire. Someone else opens a door briefly. A child probably complains. Domestic history remains reassuringly familiar. The longhouse shape creates a balance. It conserves heat but cannot trap everything. It blocks wind but still needs air. It keeps the ceiling low enough for warmth while leaving enough roof volume for smoke to collect above occupied spaces. That upper smoky layer may even help reduce insects in roof timbers and preserve certain materials, though living beneath it is hardly luxurious. You can smell the accumulated soot. It clings to wood and thatch. Your hair would probably carry the scent long after you left. Clothing absorbs it too. A household may smell of smoke so constantly that nobody notices. Visitors might. The residents simply smell like home. You walk toward the narrower end once more. The broad middle feels socially magnetic. Voices concentrate there. Work concentrates there. Heat concentrates there. The shape of the building quietly guides everyone toward the same zone. Architecture becomes behavior. You sit where the roof feels lowest and the wall is close behind you. The distance between your body and the protected interior is small. There is no wasted grandeur above. No giant glass surface nearby. No empty hallway disappearing into frozen darkness. Everything seems compressed into usefulness. The longhouse is not warm because one miraculous feature defeats the northern winter. It is warm because its proportions reduce waste. Its roof shelters a controlled volume. Its low profile fights wind. Its length creates useful zones. Its limited openings protect interior air. Its structure keeps the heaviest materials stable. Its inhabitants learn where to sit, work, sleep, and store things according to temperature. The building is a map of practical decisions. Outside, the winter sky darkens. The roof becomes almost invisible against the night. Inside, The long shape holds a ribbon of human life beneath heavy beams. Firelight runs along the central space, shadows lean across the posts. The colder ends fade into dimness, and beneath that low, sheltering roof, every metre of carefully shaped space helps turn a hostile season into something a household can endure. You settle near the centre of the house, where the fire has become the brightest object in the room. It is not hidden behind iron doors or sealed inside a tiled stove. It burns openly in a hearth built directly into the living space, a low bed of glowing fuel surrounded by stone, packed earth, or another fire-resistant surface. The flames are modest. That surprises you at first. A person from the modern world might expect Viking winter heating to involve a roaring blaze large enough to impress everyone within several valleys. Instead, an enormous fire would waste fuel, produce excessive smoke, and become rather dangerous inside a building made partly from wood and dry organic material. So the household works with something more controlled. Heat is useful. An indoor bonfire is a career-ending architectural decision. You feel warmth on your face as you move closer. The sensation is wonderfully direct. There are no vents distributing hot air through hidden pipes. The hearth warms primarily through radiation and the movement of heated air. Your cheeks feel the flame first. Your hands follow. Turn around, however, and the difference becomes obvious. Your back remains cooler. You quickly learn why people position themselves carefully around the fire. The warmest place is not simply inside. It is a ring around the hearth. That ring changes throughout the day as people cook, work, rest, and shift places. Someone tends a pot, someone repairs a tool, someone spins wool, someone leans forward, enjoying the heat with the unmistakable confidence of a person who arrived before you. The fire is both heating system and social centre. It demands constant attention. Modern heating asks almost nothing from you except money and occasional frustration with a thermostat. This fire requires labour before it even exists. Fuel must be found, cut, dried, transported, stored, and protected from rain or snow. Then someone has to light it. Someone has to keep it alive. Someone has to judge when another piece of wood should be added. Someone has to make sure sparks do not wander into roofing material. A household fire is less an appliance than a quiet responsibility shared across the day. You watch a piece of dry timber placed onto the glowing coals. The fire does not immediately leap upward. First comes a faint hiss, then a darker line forms along the wood. A small flame catches at one edge and slowly expands. The room brightens by a degree almost too subtle to notice. The smell changes too. Different fuels produce different scents. Pine can release a sharp, resinous smell. Birch burns differently. Peat produces a heavier, earthy smoke. Brushwood catches quickly. Driftwood may contribute salt and other residues from the sea. In regions with limited woodland, fuel choices become especially important. You cannot simply walk into an endless forest and take whatever you please. In Iceland, peat and other local materials can supplement scarce wood. Driftwood arriving on the coast may be valuable enough to collect carefully. Dried animal dung can also serve as fuel in places where other resources are limited, though its use varies with environment and need. Oddly enough, the fuel that smells least romantic may sometimes be the fuel that saves the most valuable timber. History rarely consults the tourism brochure. Records confirm that archaeological hearths appear in many Viking-age domestic structures, often placed where cooking, light, and warmth can serve the occupied area efficiently. Some are elongated, others are more compact. Their exact shapes differ. You may see stones arranged around the burning area, or simple prepared surfaces designed to contain embers. The hearth itself can change over the life of a house. It may be repaired, moved slightly, enlarged, or rebuilt as the household's needs change. Fire leaves evidence, Ash accumulates. Charcoal remains. Soil becomes discoloured by repeated heat. Stones crack. Tiny fragments of burned food sometimes survive. To an archaeologist, the cold ashes of a vanished hearth can describe a surprisingly busy room. To you, sitting beside the living version, it feels much simpler. It feels warm. A pot hangs above the flame. Perhaps it is suspended from a hook or supported by a tripod arrangement. In other circumstances, a vessel may sit near the coals rather than directly over high flames. Cooking and heating happen together. This matters enormously in winter. The fuel used to prepare dinner also warms the people waiting for dinner. Heat is not assigned to one purpose. It is used several times. The fire cooks porridge, stew, meat, or fish. It heats water. It provides light. It dries damp objects nearby. It helps warm chilled bodies. It makes the centre of the house habitable. Efficiency comes not from a complicated machine, but from combining tasks. You extend wet gloves toward the heat, not too close. Leather does not appreciate careless drying, and wool can scorch. A household that relies heavily on fire develops instinctive rules about distance. Children learn them early. A spark that looks charming from across the room becomes less charming when it lands on clothing. You hear a tiny snap. An ember jumps from the hearth and dies on packed earth. Someone notices immediately. Open fire brings danger. Viking homes are vulnerable to accidental burning, especially when roofing and stored materials are dry. Flames must therefore remain controlled. People sleep near fire. They work beside it. They walk around it in dim light. They carry wooden objects past it. The surprising thing may not be that houses sometimes burn. The surprising thing is how routinely people manage open flames without burning them every week. Skill becomes invisible when everyone practices it constantly. You watch the person tending the hearth. They do not stare at the fire continuously. They read it almost unconsciously. The colour of the coals matters. The amount of smoke matters. The way a log settles matters. A sudden draught matters. Too much fuel at once can produce thick smoke and rapid heat that soon disappears. Too little leaves the room cooling. The ideal fire may be a steady bed of embers with controlled flames above it. Embers are especially valuable because they release heat gradually. A deep red glow can persist long after dramatic flames have vanished. This makes overnight fire management possible, rather than rebuilding a fire from nothing each morning. People may preserve embers beneath a thatch, depending on circumstances and fuel. Ash acts as an insulating blanket. Bank the coals carefully, and some heat may remain until the morning. You kneel close enough to see the powdery grey surface. Beneath it, a dull orange glow survives. A curious footnote is that preserving fire can carry social importance far beyond convenience. In many pre-modern communities, maintaining a household flame reduces the daily burden of ignition. Starting fire without modern matches is perfectly possible, but keeping embers alive is easier. If a hearth goes completely cold, flame can be recreated with sparks, tinder, and patience, or perhaps obtained from another household. You can imagine the mild embarrassment of walking to a neighbour and effectively admitting that your fire management has failed before breakfast. Still, people cooperate. A settlement is a network of households, not a collection of isolated survival experiments. Fire may pass from one home to another in the form of glowing material carefully carried in a container. The act looks ordinary, yet you're watching heat move socially. One person's ember becomes another person's breakfast. Smoke, however, complicates everything. The fire burns in a building without a modern chimney. Smoke rises because it is hotter than the surrounding air, carrying fine particles and gases toward the roof. At first it forms a dark plume above the flames. Then it spreads. You tilt your head upward. The upper part of the room is hazier than the space where you sit. This can create a rough division between the occupied lower zone and a smoke-filled upper layer. But the boundary is never perfect. Air moves. Doors open. Wind pressure changes, people stir the fire, smoke descends occasionally and catches in your throat, your eyes sting. There goes the romantic Viking evening. You blink several times while someone who has lived here for years appears almost completely unimpressed. Smoke must escape somehow. Roof vents, gaps, doorways, and permeable roofing can all contribute to ventilation depending on house design. The goal is balance, allow enough air movement to feed the fire and remove smoke, but not so much that precious warmth vanishes immediately. This is difficult. Scholars bicker over exactly how efficient smoke ventilation is in various reconstructed Norse houses. Experimental archaeology has produced different results because small changes in roof openings, hearth position, fuel moisture, wind direction, and fire intensity alter the interior dramatically. Historians still argue whether some reconstructed smoke levels accurately represent ordinary Viking Age conditions or whether original buildings included ventilation details that archaeology does not preserve clearly. There is also debate about how much discomfort historical occupants simply accepted. Your modern lungs arrive with modern expectations. A person raised around open hearths may tolerate smoke differently, though tolerance does not make smoke harmless. Long-term exposure to indoor smoke can affect health. Eyes, lungs, and airways take the burden. The hearth solves one problem while creating another. This is common in pre-modern technology. Nothing comes free. You gain warmth. You gain smoke. You gain cooked food. You gain sparks. You gain light. You spend fuel. Every benefit arrives holding a small invoice. The household manages those trade-offs every day. You notice that the fire is not constantly at the same intensity. Morning may require more heat as people wake to a chilled interior. Cooking creates another period of stronger burning. During quieter hours, embers may be sufficient. In the evening, the hearth brightens again while work and conversation gather round it. Heat follows activity. There is little reason to maintain maximum flame when nobody needs it. Fuel is too valuable. The fire also changes according to weather. During severe cold, more heat may be necessary. During strong winds, draft through the building can make the fire burn faster or push smoke unpredictably. A calm, snowy night behaves differently from a storm. The household watches both flame and sky. You can hear weather in the hearth. When wind pressure changes, the fire flickers sideways. Smoke shifts direction. The draft seems to inhale. Everyone notices. No instrument announces what is happening. The flame itself becomes an indicator. You edge nearer and study the cooking vessel. A stew simmering for hours releases steam and warmth into the room. So does boiling water. Food preparation adds moisture to the air, which can make the interior feel different. Too much dampness is undesirable, but warm cooking areas naturally carry a mixture of smoke, steam, fat, grain, herbs, and wood. The scent settles into clothing. It enters hair. It clings to roof beams. A person returning from the outdoors immediately knows where the food is cooking. Their nose tells them before their eyes adjust. One scandalous aside concerns soot. It gathers everywhere. The roof darkens. Wooden surfaces acquire black deposits. Objects suspended high in the room may become coated over time. Cleanliness exists, of course, but the standard is shaped by the technology of the house. A spotless ceiling above an open hearth is an ambition best reserved for someone with unlimited free time and a tragic misunderstanding of smoke. The soot is inconvenient, but smoke may also discourage insects and help preserve some organic materials in roof spaces. Again, a nuisance occasionally provides a benefit. You move to the side and feel how rapidly warmth diminishes with distance. This explains the intense importance of seating. The best places around a fire are valuable not merely for status or conversation, but for physical comfort. Older people, children, guests, workers, and household leaders may all have reasons to occupy particular positions. Social arrangements become entangled with heat. Where you sit says something, and how close you sit says something else. A hearth can quietly organize a household without speaking a word. You stretch your hands above the embers. The heat presses gently into your palms. It is not spectacular. That is what makes it effective. A steady fire can continue for hours without consuming the fuel required by a roaring blaze. Experienced fire keeping favors patience. Add a little, wait, shift a coal, turn the wood, cover part of the embers, open airflow briefly, close it again. The work is repetitive enough to become soothing. You watch the orange glow deepen as evening settles over the building. The flames shrink. Their light grows softer. Faces around you become less distinct. You hear the scrape of a pot being moved away and the rustle of someone settling onto a bench. The fire has cooked, illuminated, dried, warmed, and gathered the household into one shared circle. Now it becomes quieter. Grey ash slowly forms over red coals. Heat continues to rise from beneath. No machinery hums, no pipes tick behind the walls. There is only the soft crack of charcoal, the scent of wood smoke, and the careful preservation of a small controlled flame against a vast cold night. You settle onto a raised sleeping bench along the wall, and for the first time the problem of Viking winter warmth becomes deeply personal. It is one thing to understand walls, roofs, and hearths. It is another thing entirely to lie still for several hours while darkness presses against the building and the temperature slowly falls. During the day, you can move, you can work, you can carry wood, grind grain, repair equipment, tender animals, stir a pot, or simply drift toward a warmer place when your fingers begin to complain. Sleep removes many of those options. Your body becomes still. The fire may be reduced. The coldest hours of the night arrive before dawn. Keeping warm in bed therefore depends less on heating the whole house and more on creating a small protected climate around the sleeper. The solution begins beneath you. You're not necessarily lying directly on the floor. Raised benches or sleeping platforms can keep a person away from the coldest surface in the room. Cold settles low, and packed earth can draw heat from anything touching it for long periods. A wooden bench provides separation. On top of it may lie straw, hay, wool, skins, folded textiles, or other bedding materials available to the household. The exact arrangement varies with wealth, region, season, and personal preference. You lower yourself carefully. The surface is firmer than a modern mattress, much firmer. There is no deep cloud of synthetic foam waiting to embrace your spine and then charge you for a premium sleep experience. Instead, comfort comes through layers. Dry plant material can create padding while trapping air. Wool adds insulation. Furs and skins can reduce drafts and protect against the cold surface beneath. A well-made sleeping place is therefore less a single object than a stack of useful materials. You run your hand across a woolen blanket. It feels slightly coarse. The fibres catch against your fingertips. Wool is one of the most important materials in northern life because it remains insulating even when somewhat damp, resists ignition better than many plant fibres, and can be spun and woven into clothing, blankets, sails, and household textiles. Records confirm that wool production is deeply embedded in Norse economies, with sheep providing material that supports both domestic survival and wider trade. For winter sleepers, wool is especially valuable because of the tiny pockets of air held among its fibres. Those pockets slow the movement of heat away from your body. You climb beneath several layers. The first few moments are not pleasant. The bedding itself feels cold. Then your body begins warming the trapped air. Slowly, the space beneath the covering changes. Your knees feel warmer. Your shoulders relax. Your hands stop feeling quite so interested in becoming separate objects. The principle is simple. The blanket does not create much heat. You do. The bedding merely helps keep that heat from escaping too quickly. This is why loose layers can work better than one thin covering. Each layer adds trapped air. You're building a small thermal fortress using sheep hair. There are worse technologies. Clothing remains on your body as well. The image of everyone stripping down into dedicated sleepwear belongs mostly to much later habits. In a cold house, removing useful insulation for the sake of bedtime elegance would be a peculiar decision. You may sleep wearing a linen undergarment, woolen tunic, socks, cap, or other clothing depending on conditions. Some garments may be loosened, others stay firmly in place. A dry head covering can be particularly helpful. A large amount of body heat can be lost from any uncovered area, and your head is difficult to tuck completely beneath blankets without creating the minor inconvenience of needing to breathe. So a cap offers a sensible compromise. You pull one down over your ears. It is not glamorous. Warm ears rarely are. You curl slightly on your side. Body position matters. Drawing your arms and legs inward reduces exposed surface area. You do this naturally when cold. The body knows several tricks long before anyone explains them. People also sleep close together. That may mean spouses, children, siblings, servants, guests, or other household members sharing sleeping areas. Privacy is not always organized around separate bedrooms. The idea that every person requires an isolated, heated room would seem extraordinarily wasteful in many pre-modern households. Space costs labor, heat costs fuel, beds cost materials, human warmth, meanwhile, is already present, so people use it. Two bodies beneath shared coverings create more heat than one. Several people near one another reduce the amount of cold air circulating between them. This is practical, social, and occasionally annoying. Someone snores, someone steals the blanket, someone has cold feet and considers your legs a public heating service. Humanity progresses in many ways, but apparently not all of them. Oddly enough, sleeping arrangements can reveal hierarchy as clearly as seating arrangements. Not everyone receives the same quality of bedding or the same position within the house. A household leader may occupy a more comfortable or prestigious sleeping place. Guests may receive special treatment depending on status. Servants or enslaved people may sleep in less favorable conditions. Children may share crowded spaces. Warmth is physical, but access to comfort is social. The best blanket in the household is not merely a blanket, it can represent wealth. Producing a large woolen textile requires an astonishing amount of labor. Sheep must be raised, fleece must be collected, wool must be cleaned and prepared, fibers must be spun into thread. Thread must be woven. Edges may be finished. Dyes may be added if resources allow. A blanket that looks simple by modern standards may contain many hours of work. You begin to understand why textiles are valuable possessions rather than disposable household goods. A torn covering is repaired. A worn edge is reinforced. Useful cloth is not casually thrown away because the colour has become unfashionable. One scandalous aside is that bedding may host more life than the sleepers would prefer. Fleas, lice, and other parasites are common problems in pre-modern households. Warm textiles, human bodies, animals, and crowded sleeping spaces create excellent opportunities for unwanted guests. People wash, comb, air bedding, and use grooming tools, but complete control is difficult. A beautifully warm wool blanket may occasionally provide hospitality to creatures nobody invited. The historical bed is cozy in more ways than one. You shift beneath the covers and notice another problem: moisture. If clothing is damp from snow, sweat, or work, wearing it to sleep can make you colder. Water transfers heat efficiently, so drying garments becomes important before night. People hang or place damp items near warmth, taking care not to scorch them. Shoes may be stuffed with dry material. Wet wool can still provide insulation, but dry wool is much more pleasant. The difference between a comfortable night and a miserable one may begin several hours before bedtime. Winter survival rewards routines. Dry your clothes, protect the bedding. Keep spare textiles away from leaks. Repair holes. Do not allow precious sleeping materials to become soaked. A roof drip directly onto your blanket is not merely irritating. It removes one of your defenses against the night. You touch the wall behind the bench and immediately pull your hand away. It is cooler than the bedding. That is why sleeping platforms may be arranged with some separation from the colder surface, or protected by hanging textiles, boards, skins, or stored materials. A textile hanging along a wall can reduce drafts and make the surface beside a sleeper feel less severe. It adds another trapped layer of air. The effect may be modest, but winter comfort is built from modest effects. A slightly warmer wall, a raised bed, a wool layer, a fur covering, a dry cap, another person nearby, a carefully banked fire. Individually, none creates luxury. Together, they create sleep. Scholars bicker over how common particular types of bedding are across different Norse communities, because textiles rarely survive well in archaeological conditions. Wood decays, straw disappears, wool usually decomposes unless preserved in unusual environments. Burials, waterlogged sites, mineral deposits, and later written descriptions provide clues, but the ordinary bed leaves a faint archaeological footprint. Historians still argue whether reconstructed sleeping arrangements sometimes appear too neat and generous compared with what poorer households actually possess. Elite graves can preserve evidence of costly textiles, but wealthy burials do not necessarily describe the nightly experience of a farm worker. No agreement has been reached on exactly how many layers an ordinary sleeper might use during the harshest weather. The practical answer probably varies enormously. Some households own abundant wool, others make do with less. Some have access to fur, others rely more heavily on clothing and straw and shared warmth. Age matters too. Young children lose heat quickly. Older adults may feel cold more sharply. A person weakened by illness or poor nutrition has a harder time maintaining body temperature. Winter bedding therefore becomes part of care. You might place a child between adults. You might give an elderly relative the warmer position. You might add another skin to someone recovering from sickness. Warmth becomes an expression of responsibility. It can also become an expression of hospitality. A traveller arriving in freezing weather needs more than food. They need somewhere protected to sleep. Norse hospitality has practical consequences, because refusing shelter in severe conditions can be genuinely dangerous. A guest may receive a place on a bench, shared bedding, or access to a warmer part of the household. You can imagine the awkward negotiations that follow when there are more travellers than good sleeping spaces. Generosity remains admirable. So does owning enough blankets. The night deepens. Activity around you slows. The house grows quieter. Without continuous work, less body heat is generated through movement. The main fire may be reduced to preserve fuel and lower the risk of sparks. This means bedding must carry more of the burden. You notice that the warmth beneath your covers stays surprisingly stable, as long as you remain still. Then you lift one corner, cold air rushes inside. Instant regret. You lower it again quickly. A sleeping cover works best when it remains tucked around the body. Edges matter. Drafts entering near the shoulders or feet can drain away comfort. People learn to arrange blankets carefully. A fur placed on top may help weigh lighter textiles down. A tucked wool layer prevents warm air escaping from the sides. Sleeping technique becomes another small body of knowledge that nobody bothers writing down because everyone already knows it. You tuck your feet under the lower edge. Much better. Footwear may remain nearby rather than on the feet, depending on the household and conditions. Cold shoes in the morning are unpleasant, so keeping them somewhere protected has obvious appeal. Same applies to clothing. A garment left beside an outer doorway may feel like frozen armor when dawn arrives. Keeping tomorrow's clothes within the warmer occupied space makes waking less punishing. The morning transition matters almost as much as the night itself. You do not want to leave warm bedding and immediately enter cold fabric. One clever habit is to keep frequently worn layers close enough that they do not become completely chilled. Your mind drifts toward the soundscape. There is no perfect silence. Someone breathes heavily nearby. Wood creaks. Wind hums beyond the roof. A person turns beneath a blanket. Somewhere in the darkness comes a faint scratching sound that everyone chooses to attribute to an innocent mouse. The air cools gradually, but your body remains surrounded by trapped warmth. You understand now that Viking sleep does not depend on making the entire building comfortable by modern standards. That would consume too much fuel. Instead, warmth shrinks around the sleeper. The heated world becomes the size of a bench, then the size of a blanket, then the small pocket of air around your skin. It is an efficient approach. Heat the person more than the room. Use clothing as portable insulation. Use bedding as a second shelter. Use the sleeping platform to separate the body from cold ground. Use shared warmth where possible. Preserve dryness. Protect every useful textile. The strategy feels surprisingly familiar to anyone who has ever slept in a cold cabin or under too many blankets during a power cut. Technology changes. The human body remains stubbornly consistent. You pull the wool higher around your shoulders. The fibers brush your chin. Your breath warms the little space near your face. Beyond the blanket, the house is dark and cool. Within it, your body has created a private pocket of winter survival. You no longer need the whole room to feel warm. You only need this small protected space to hold the heat you already possess. And as the sounds of the household soften into slow breathing and occasional creaking timber, you discover that the Viking night is endured not by defeating the cold, but by wrapping yourself carefully enough that it cannot quite reach you. You hear the animals before you see them. A low shuffle comes from the darker end of the building. Hooves scrape against a hard floor. Something large exhales through its nose, followed by the quiet clink of wood against a stall partition. The smell reaches you next. Hay, dung, warm hide, damp wool. It is not subtle. A modern visitor might take one breath and immediately begin reconsidering every romantic idea ever attached to Viking domestic life. But to a Norse household facing a bitter winter, livestock are far too valuable to leave exposed merely because they smell inconvenient. Animals provide food, fibre, labour, wealth, and status. In cold regions, keeping them alive through winter is an essential part of keeping people alive as well. So you move toward the sheltered livestock area. A cow turns its head. Its breath hangs briefly in the cold air around its muzzle. The animal is producing heat continuously. So is every sheep nearby. So is every goat. A living body converts food into energy, and some of that energy becomes warmth. Bring several large animals into a protected structure, and the temperature around them can rise noticeably. This does not mean Viking families necessarily invite cattle to sleep beside the dinner table. Domestic arrangements vary enormously. In some longhouses and farm buildings, animals occupy one end of the same large structure, separated from human living areas by partitions, passages, changes in floor level, or distinct internal spaces. Elsewhere, animals may be housed in adjoining structures. What matters is proximity. People and livestock can benefit from the same sheltered building complex without sharing precisely the same room. Records confirm that archaeological excavations of Norse farmsteads sometimes reveal internal areas interpreted as byres or stalls, identified through features such as drainage channels, partitions, floor deposits, and chemical traces associated with animals. You step carefully. The floor here is different. A shallow channel runs along part of the livestock area. That is not decorative. Animals create waste, a great deal of it. Keeping a cow indoors means managing urine, dung, bedding, mud, and the astonishing ability of livestock to stand exactly where you are trying to work. Drainage becomes important. So does regular cleaning. Straw, hay, dried plants, or other bedding material may be spread beneath animals to absorb moisture and improve comfort. The used bedding can later become valuable fertilizer. Even waste belongs to the farm economy. Very little is truly wasted when survival depends on turning every available resource into something useful. You look at the cow again. Keeping it sheltered offers several advantages. Cold wind increases an animal's energy needs. An exposed animal must burn more calories simply to maintain body temperature. That means it consumes more fodder. Winter fodder is precious because grass is no longer growing freely beneath snow or frozen ground. By protecting animals from wind and severe weather, the household may reduce some of that energy demand. Warmth is therefore connected to food supply. A sheltered cow may require less energy to endure the cold than one standing in an icy field. The calculation is never exact in a farmer's mind, but the principle is obvious through experience. Animals that stay protected tend to cope better. You move closer to a stall. The animal's flank is warm beneath your palm. That warmth is not free. It comes from hay harvested months earlier. Every mouthful represents labour. Grass must be cut during the growing season, so it must dry, it must be gathered, it must be transported, it must be stored somewhere protected from rain. Then, throughout winter, someone must portion it carefully. If fodder runs out before spring, the household faces a serious problem, so livestock heating is not magical. You are converting stored summer sunlight into winter body heat through the digestive system of a cow. It is a wonderfully complicated way to warm a building. Fortunately, the cow also provides milk, calves, hides, horn, bone, and eventually meat, so the arrangement has other benefits. Sheep contribute differently. Their thick fleece already makes them excellent examples of natural insulation. You stand beside one and press your fingers gently into the wool. Your hand almost disappears. Close to the skin, the air is much warmer than at the outer surface. Wool traps still air, which slows heat loss. The sheep is wearing the same basic technology that Norse people use in their clothing and blankets. The sheep simply gets it directly from the manufacturer. A curious footnote is that livestock can create such a warm microclimate in enclosed spaces that frost may remain outside, while water inside the animal area stays unfrozen longer. The effect depends on building size, ventilation, animal numbers, and outdoor conditions. Of course. Still, anyone who has entered a full barn on a winter day recognizes the sensation. The air feels different, heavier, warmer, more humid, and substantially more interested in your nose. You pause beside a wooden partition. Heat from animals can move through a shared building, but so can moisture. This creates another balancing problem. Livestock exhale water vapor. Their waste releases moisture. Wet bedding increases humidity. If the structure becomes too damp, walls, timber, fodder, and stored goods may suffer. Condensation can develop. Mold becomes a risk. Animal health can decline in stale air. So, once again, warmth cannot simply be trapped without thought. Ventilation matters. The household needs enough airflow to keep the livestock environment tolerable while avoiding unnecessary heat loss. Winter living constantly asks for compromise. Too open, and everything freezes. Too closed, and everything becomes damp, smoky, or foul. You hear a goat give a sharp little call. Goats are useful animals in difficult landscapes because they can browse vegetation that cattle might ignore. They provide milk, meat, hides, and hair. They are also highly capable of behaving as though every fence is merely a philosophical suggestion. Keeping them indoors solves some problems while introducing others. A goat can chew objects. It can climb. It can investigate containers. It can escape through gaps that appear physically impossible. If the Norse household gains a few degrees of warmth from housing goats nearby, it may pay for that warmth in patience. Oddly enough, Medieval and later Scandinavian farm traditions preserve many examples of humans and livestock occupying closely connected buildings. This does not prove that every Viking household follows one standard arrangement, but it shows how practical the idea remains in northern rural life. Separating all human and animal structures completely is easier when building materials, fuel, labour, and land are abundant. When resources are limited, combining functions can be efficient. One roof may protect several forms of wealth at once. You look along the row of animals. There is another reason to keep them close. Security. Livestock represents stored value. A healthy cow can be enormously important to a household. So can breeding animals, predators, theft, storms, and accidents threaten animals left far from the main dwelling. Bringing them into protected farm buildings makes supervision easier. Someone hears if a cow becomes distressed. Someone notices if an animal is ill. Someone can assist with feeding or birth without walking across a frozen landscape in darkness. That proximity matters during long nights. You imagine waking to the sound of a restless cattle. It may be inconvenient. It may also save an animal. A household's warmth therefore emerges from a larger system of survival. People protect livestock. Livestock provide food and materials. Their bodies add heat to sheltered spaces. Their manure fertilizes fields. The fields grow crops and fodder. The cycle continues. No single part stands alone. You step toward a pile of stored hay. It smells sweet and dry. The smell is pleasant compared with the floor beneath the cattle, which is setting a very low standard. Hay storage must be protected carefully from dampness. Spoiled fodder is dangerous because animals depend on it during months when fresh grazing is unavailable. Households estimate how much they need, but winter length can vary. An early snowfall or late spring can turn careful planning into anxiety. The number of animals kept through winter may therefore depend on available fodder. Some are slaughtered in autumn because feeding every animal until spring would be impossible. This seasonal culling provides meat at the same moment the household reduces the number of mouths consuming stored hay. It is practical and emotionally ordinary within a farming society, even if modern listeners accustomed to supermarkets rarely think in those terms. Winter begins with decisions about who can be fed. The animals that remain are investments in the next year. Breeding females are especially important. Healthy cattle, sheep, and goats allow the farm to continue producing milk, wool, offspring, and labour. Keeping them warm enough is therefore not kindness alone. It is economic survival. You hear a cow chewing slowly. The rhythm is almost hypnotic. Ruminants continue digesting food for long periods, and digestion itself produces heat. Fermentation inside the animal's digestive system releases energy. A large herbivore is, in effect, a quiet biological furnace powered by grass. No chimney required. Some odours included. One scandalous aside concerns exactly how thoroughly animal smells may penetrate nearby human spaces. Modern reconstructions often try to remain visitor-friendly. Historical households have no such obligation. Clothing, hair, timber, bedding, and even food containers may absorb the surrounding mixture of smoke, livestock, damp wool, and manure. People living within it become accustomed to the scent. Your nose adapts remarkably quickly. What seems overwhelming on arrival becomes background information after enough time. Scholars still argue whether animals and humans routinely share the same roof in all types of Viking-age longhouses that contain possible stall areas. Some excavated features appear strongly consistent with livestock housing, but interpretation can be difficult. A sunken area might be a byre, a channel might indicate drainage, chemical evidence may suggest manure, yet buildings change function over time, and not every internal division survives clearly. Arguments split along regional patterns, household wealth, seasonality, and the interpretation of floor deposits. In some settlements, combined human and animal buildings seem convincing. In others, separate structures may have been preferred. The Viking world is too large for one universal answer. You're looking at a farming culture stretching across different climates and landscapes. A farm in Denmark does not face exactly the same conditions as one in Iceland. A wealthy Norwegian estate has different resources from a marginal Greenland settlement. The architecture responds accordingly. Still, the logic of animal warmth remains persuasive. Several cattle inside a sheltered end of a building produce a meaningful amount of heat. Even when partitions limit direct airflow, the surrounding structure benefits from having one zone that is warmer than the frozen outdoors. Shared walls also reduce exposed surfaces. A wall separating human and animal spaces does not face Arctic wind. It faces another occupied room. That can reduce heat loss. You place your hand against such a partition. The wood feels less cold than an exterior surface. Nothing dramatic is happening. There is simply less temperature difference across it. The arrangement makes practical sense. The animals are not central heating in the modern sense. They do not warm every human corner evenly. But they contribute, and Viking winter survival is full of contributions. A few degrees here, a blocked wind there, a dry blanket, a sheltered cow, a partition that shares warmth instead of losing it outdoors. Small gains accumulate. You move toward the exit of the livestock area. Behind you, hooves shuffle softly through bedding. A sheep sneezes. The goat watches you with the suspicious expression of a creature already planning something. The air nearer the animals remains warm, damp, and unmistakably alive. You understand that the Norse farm is not divided neatly into human technology and animal nature. They work together. The household shelters living creatures because those creatures sustain the household. Their warmth becomes one more resource among milk, wool, labour, hides, fertilizer, and future offspring. Outside, winter can freeze the ground hard enough to stop growth entirely. Inside, the animals continue breathing, chewing, digesting, and giving off heat. And beneath one protected roof, the quiet warmth of living bodies helps keep both farm and family moving through the cold. You step into a storage area where winter warmth begins long before anyone strikes a spark. Bundles of split wood lean against one wall. Smaller sticks are stacked nearby. Peat has been cut into dark blocks and left to dry. Scraps of bark, brushwood, and other combustible material have been gathered rather than discarded. Nothing here looks dramatic. That is precisely why it matters. A household can own the strongest walls and the finest wool in the district. But if the fuel pile disappears halfway through winter, admiration for the architecture becomes considerably less enthusiastic. Cold season survival depends on preparation. You bend and lift a piece of firewood. It feels dry and surprisingly light. That dryness is valuable. Freshly cut wood contains water. Before wet wood can burn efficiently, much of that moisture must first be heated and driven away as vapor. The result is more smoke, weaker heat, and fuel that seems determined to disappoint everyone. Dry wood behaves differently. It catches more readily. It burns hotter. It produces useful heat instead of wasting so much energy, boiling its own moisture away. People do not need laboratory instruments to learn this. They see it. They hear it. They smell it. Wet wood hisses. Dry wood cracks. A household that has spent many winters around the open fire develops a practical knowledge of fuel, almost as naturally as you recognize whether bread has burned. You place the log back on the pile. Some fuel may have been collected months earlier. That timing is essential. Winter preparation begins while the landscape is still green. During summer and autumn, people gather resources while daylight lasts longer, and movement across the countryside is easier. Wood can be cut. Branches can be collected. Peat can be sliced from suitable ground. Brush can be bundled. Driftwood can be hauled above the reach of tides. Everything must then be stored where it has a chance to dry. You imagine the labour involved. An axe rises and falls into timber. Wood is dragged or carried home. Larger pieces are split. Smaller branches are sorted. Stacks are arranged so air can circulate. Rain has to be kept off without sealing moisture inside. There is no delivery truck arriving in January because someone forgot to order another cord. What you fail to gather during the warmer months may be difficult to replace once snow deepens. Records confirm that fuel availability varies sharply across Norse settlements, especially in the North Atlantic, where forests can be sparse or vulnerable to heavy use. This forces households to become flexible. Wood is desirable, but it is not always plentiful. In parts of Scandinavia, access to woodland may make firewood more readily available. In Iceland, the situation can be harder. Early settlers encounter wooded areas, particularly birch, but clearing, grazing, erosion, and continued use reduce woodland resources over time. A household cannot assume that every hillside will provide endless timber, so fuel becomes a mixture. Peat is one important option. You pick up a dark block. It is earthy, fibrous, and much denser than the dry stick beside it. Peat forms when partially decayed plant material accumulates in wet ground over long periods. Cut it out, dry it properly, and it can burn. The smell is different from wood. The smoke can feel heavier. The flame may be less visually cheerful. But winter does not grade fuel for beauty. It grades fuel for usefulness. Cutting peat is demanding work. You imagine approaching the bog during a suitable season with cutting tools. Blocks are sliced out and lifted. They are wet and heavy at first. They must be laid out or stacked to dry. Turn them too little, and moisture remains. Leave them exposed to persistent rain, and your future fire becomes a collection of damp rectangles. Timing matters, weather matters, labour matters. The fuel pile is therefore partly a record of good planning. A dry block in winter represents work, completed when the sun was still strong enough to make that work possible. You move past bundles of brushwood. Thin branches burn quickly. That makes them useful for starting fires or increasing flames rapidly. They are less useful for maintaining a long steady heat because their small size means they disappear fast. Large logs burn longer. Peat behaves differently again. A skilled household combines fuel according to need. Small dry material for ignition, moderate pieces to establish flame. Larger fuel or peat for sustained heat. You're not merely burning whatever lies nearby. You're managing a limited resource. Oddly enough, even tiny household scraps may have value. Wood shavings from craft work can become tinder. Broken wooden objects may eventually become fuel if they are no longer repairable. Bark, dried plant stalks, and suitable scraps can help start fires. A piece of material may serve several lives before finally becoming smoke. A plank can begin as part of a building. Later, it becomes a repair patch. Later still, a smaller usable section is cut away. Only when nothing more can be made from it does the remaining wood reach the hearth. Throwing useful timber away would make little sense when trees represent labour. Transport, construction, tools, ships, fences, furniture, containers, and heat. You begin to see fuel as part of a competition between needs. Burning good timber produces warmth today. Using it for a roof beam may protect warmth for decades. Turning it into a tool may increase food production. Building a boat from it may connect the farm to trade. Every log has choices attached to it. This is especially important where woodland is limited. A tree is not automatically firewood. Sometimes it is too valuable to burn. Driftwood becomes particularly interesting in treeless or sparsely wooded coastal regions. Logs carried by ocean currents can wash ashore far from the forests where they originally grew. To you, a weathered trunk on a beach may look like debris. To a Norse household, it can be a gift. Large driftwood may be suitable for construction or tools. Smaller or poorer pieces can become fuel. Rights to collect driftwood can therefore matter. A curious footnote is that coastal communities may watch beaches after storms because storms rearrange shorelines and deliver useful material. The same weather that makes the sea dangerous can leave timber lying above the tide line. You picture people walking a cold beach, scanning the grey sand for dark shapes. There is almost a treasure hunting quality to it, except the treasure is a log, and everyone is far more pleased to see it than most modern people would understand. Animal dung can also become fuel once dried. The idea may produce a slight hesitation in you. That is understandable. Yet dried dung burns in many traditional societies around the world, particularly where wood is scarce. It represents concentrated plant material that has already passed through an animal. When properly dried, it can supplement other fuels. No one needs to pretend it smells like cedar. The important thing is that it burns. One scandalous aside is that a household may therefore find itself carefully collecting material that a modern visitor spends considerable effort avoiding with their boots. Winter changes your standards. What appears unpleasant in summer may look remarkably useful when the temperature falls. You walk toward a stack protected beneath an overhang. Storage is nearly as important as collection. Fuel must remain dry. If snow piles directly onto firewood and then melts into it, the heating value falls. If peat is stored before it dries properly, it can remain damp. If wood is stacked tightly against wet soil, moisture can move upward. So people raise, cover, arrange, and rotate fuel as needed. The exact method depends on the building and climate, but the goal is constant. Keep tomorrow's fire from becoming today's sponge. You touch the outer pieces, cold. Then you reach deeper into the stack, dry. Protected fuel has a different texture. You can almost judge it by sound. Knock two dry pieces together and the sound is sharper. Wet wood produces a duller note. Experience makes these small signals meaningful. A household may also keep a limited amount of fuel closer to the living area so it can dry further before burning. But placing too much combustible material near open flame creates obvious danger. Once again, convenience wrestles with safety. You want dry wood nearby. You do not want the entire winter supply beside a spark. Some distance is wise. A separate shed, covered stack, sheltered wall, or storage structure may protect the main reserve. Then smaller quantities can be brought indoors as needed. This creates another winter task. Fuel carrying never really ends. Every fire gradually turns solid material into ashen gases. Every warm evening consumes part of the summer's labour. You can almost watch the winter supply shrinking week by week. That changes how people think about fire. Waste becomes visible. A modern household might turn the heating higher without seeing the fuel disappear. Here, every extra log leaves an actual gap in the stack. The mathematics is standing in front of you. If the pile looks too small in early winter, everyone understands the problem. You cannot negotiate with February. This encourages careful rationing. Not every hour requires the same amount of heat. A household may burn more fuel during cooking and active evening periods, then rely on lower fires or embers when people are sleeping. Milder days offer opportunities to conserve. Sunny weather may reduce demand slightly. Strong wind may increase it. Fire use follows conditions rather than a fixed schedule. You become attentive to the sky. Is the wind changing? Is snow coming? Has the temperature dropped? How much fuel remains? Every answer affects what goes on to the hearth. Scholars still argue whether fuel shortages were a routine winter pressure across much of the Viking world or a severe problem concentrated mainly in particular environments. Archaeological charcoal can reveal what kinds of wood were burned, while pollen studies and environmental evidence help reconstruct changing vegetation. Yet interpreting household behaviour remains difficult. A scarcity of charcoal from one tree species could reflect lack of access, deliberate conservation, or simple local preference. Arguments split along how quickly woodland decline followed Norse settlement in some North Atlantic regions, and how strongly human activity, grazing, climate, and erosion contributed to the change. There is broad agreement that settlers transformed certain landscapes. The difficult question is exactly how fast. And with what consequences for ordinary households? You stand beside the fuel pile and imagine those consequences in practical terms. The farther you must travel for wood, the more labour every fire requires. The smaller the woodland, the more carefully valuable timber must be allocated. The wetter the climate, the harder drying becomes. The longer the winter, the larger the reserve must be. Preparation is therefore shaped by local knowledge. A family learns how much fuel a typical cold season consumes. Then nature provides an atypical season, just to keep everyone humble. A winter may begin early. Snow may remain late. Storms may prevent gathering. Stored fuel may become wet. A household may be forced to reduce consumption. At that point, people rely more heavily on clothing, bedding, food, shared spaces, and selective heating. Comfort shrinks before survival does. You can tolerate a cooler room. You cannot tolerate using the last piece of fuel while weeks of winter remain. Fuel management becomes an exercise in restraint. You choose when warmth matters most. You conserve when you can. You protect the reserve like stored food because, in a sense, it is another form of stored energy. The connection between summer and winter becomes beautifully clear. Sunlight grows grass. Grass becomes peat over immense stretches of time, or feeds animals that produce dung. Sunlight also grows trees. People harvest those resources during warmer weather. Months later, the hearth releases that captured energy as heat. A winter fire is summer returning in another form. You lift one final piece of dry wood. Its bark flakes beneath your thumb. It seems ordinary. Yet it carries cutting, hauling, splitting, stacking, drying, protection, and judgment inside it. Someone worked for this future flame. That may be the deepest lesson in the storage area. Warmth is planned. It is gathered while no one is cold. It is protected while no one urgently needs it. Then, when darkness lengthens and frost covers the ground, the household begins spending those carefully stored days of the labour one log, one bundle and one glowing block of peat at a time. You sit near the warmest part of the house while evening work quietly gathers around you. Nothing about the scene feels hurried. A spindle turns between careful fingers. A wooden bowl rests beside someone's knee. Leather creaks as a strap is pulled tight. A knife scrapes gently along a piece of wood. Someone stirs a pot without looking at it very much, because the motion has been repeated so often that the hand seems to remember on its own. In winter, heat shapes where all of this happens. People do not scatter themselves evenly through the building simply because there is floor space available. They gather where warmth, light, and companionship already exist. The hearth becomes a kind of invisible magnet. You notice how each task chooses its place. Fine work needs light. Wet work needs warmth. Cooking needs flame. Mending is easier when fingers are not stiff. Children are easier to watch when they remain within the occupied centre. Older people benefit from the warmer air. Visitors naturally drift inward too. The result is a dense zone of activity where many parts of household life happen almost at once. A modern person might call this inefficient. Surely every activity deserves its own room, its own table, perhaps its own tasteful storage solution. The Norse household has other priorities. Separate heated rooms would demand more fuel, so life concentrates. You watch a woman spinning wool. The spindle drops and turns. Twisted thread rises between her fingers. The process looks delicate, but it is relentless work. Clothing, sails, blankets, bags, and other textiles require enormous quantities of thread. Winter provides long hours indoors, making textile production one of the most practical ways to use dark evenings. Your ears catch the faint hum of conversation beneath the soft whir of the spindle. Hands work while voices move from one subject to another. News, weather, animals, a neighbour, a marriage, a debt, a person who has apparently borrowed a tool for so long that everyone has agreed it now belongs to him spiritually, if not legally. Daily life does not stop because history later prefers to remember voyages and battles. Most evenings are made from ordinary talk. Records confirm that textile work is a major part of Norse domestic production, and archaeological finds of spindle whorls, loom weights, needles, and weaving tools reveal just how central that labour is. You pick up a spindle whorl. It is small, heavy, and simple. Yet this little object helps turn raw wool into thread. The thread becomes cloth. The cloth becomes clothing. The clothing becomes warmth. Domestic work is directly connected to survival. A wool tunic begins long before anyone wears it. Someone tends sheep. Someone prepares fleece. Someone spins. Someone weaves. Someone cuts. Someone sews. Then someone repairs the garment repeatedly because making another one is not a trivial afternoon project. You move your hand toward a nearby sleeve. A tear has been carefully stitched closed. The repair is visible. Nobody is embarrassed by that. A repaired garment is useful. Winter encourages maintenance rather than replacement. Cold weather exposes every weakness in clothing. A loose seam becomes a draft. A worn mitten becomes a problem. A damaged shoe can leave a foot wet. So evening work often includes checking objects that must function the following day. You see leather being softened between strong fingers. A strap is inspected for cracks. A shoe receives another stitch. A wooden handle is smoothed where it has begun to split. The warm interior helps. Materials become easier to manipulate than they would be outside. Hands remain flexible. Resins and fats used in maintenance may soften. Damp leather can dry gradually. Tasks that protect tomorrow's comfort happen in tonight's warmth. There is efficiency in combining them. The fire is already burning. The room is already occupied. So everyone brings useful work closer. You begin to understand that winter heat does not merely prevent freezing. It creates productive time. Without a protected indoor space, many tasks would become slower, harder, or impossible during severe weather. Warmth supports the household economy. You lean closer to the cooking area. A pot simmers gently. Grain thickens in water. Perhaps barley or oats form the base of the meal, with dairy, herbs, meat, fish, or vegetables added according to what is available. The smell is simple, but comforting. Cooking changes the room. Steam rises. Fat warms. Bread or flat cakes may cook on hot surfaces. The fire does more than prepare calories. It determines the rhythm of social life. People know when food will be ready by watching and smelling. No clock announces dinner. The pot does. Someone lifts the lid. A little cloud of steam escapes. Several heads turn almost immediately. Human beings remain impressively consistent across centuries when food appears. The meal may be shared from bowls, vessels, or communal serving arrangements depending on circumstance. People eat near the heat because there is little reason to carry warm food into a colder corner. A hot meal warms from within. That matters after outdoor labour. You imagine someone returning from tending animals or checking fences. Their clothing is cold. Their cheeks are red. Their fingers feel clumsy. They sit down, receive something warm to eat, and slowly return to comfort. Heat enters from several directions at once. Fire against the skin, food in the stomach, dry clothes replacing damp ones, conversation reducing the sense of isolation. Warmth becomes physical and social at the same time. Oddly enough, hospitality can make winter heating more complicated. A guest adds another body to the room, which contributes a little heat, but the guest also consumes food, space, and perhaps bedding. Still, hosting travellers is important in a world where journeys can be difficult and weather can turn dangerous quickly. A stranger arriving at dusk may carry news from another district. A merchant may bring information about trade. A relative may bring gossip, which is often distributed with admirable efficiency. The warm household becomes a communication centre. Stories travel beside people. So do songs, legal news, family histories, rumours, and memories. You hear someone begin telling a tale. Work does not stop. That is important. Storytelling fits around labour. A listener can spin thread, another can carve, another can mend. Children can sit quietly for a few miraculous minutes. The story fills the same space as smoke and firelight. It gives shape to a long winter evening. There is no electric entertainment waiting in another room. Human voices do much of the work. Poetry, stories, riddles, and remembered events can make darkness feel shorter. A curious footnote is that skilled storytellers and poets can hold significant social value in Norse society. The ability to remember complicated verse or family histories is not merely entertainment. Memory carries status, identity, and sometimes political meaning. In an oral culture, the person who remembers well preserves more than amusement. You listen to the cadence of the speaker's voice. Certain names receive emphasis. Everyone seems to know parts of the story already. That does not make it boring. Familiarity can be comforting. You know what comes next and still want to hear it. The winter household understands repetition differently from modern entertainment culture. A well-known tale is not ruined because you have heard it before. It becomes a shared object. Still, daily life contains variety. Games appear. A board may be brought out. Pieces are placed carefully. Strategy games associated with the Norse world can occupy long stretches of indoor time. You watch two players study each other across the board. The room becomes quieter around them. A move is made. Someone raises an eyebrow. Another person offers advice nobody requested. This too feels remarkably modern. The warm centre of the house becomes a place where competition can happen without anyone needing to cross a frozen field. Craftwork fills other hours. Bone can be carved. Wood can be shaped. Tools can be repaired. Fishing gear can be checked. Nets may need attention. Handles loosen. Containers crack. A household owns many objects that must survive repeated hard use. Winter provides time for repair, especially when agricultural work outdoors slows. The smell of fresh cut wood mixes with smoke. A little pile of shavings grows beside a craftsperson's feet. Those shavings may later help start a fire. Nothing useful remains useless for long. You watch a needle move through cloth. The light is poor by modern standards. That makes the skill more impressive. Oil lamps can help, sometimes fueled by animal or fish fats in suitable regions. A small flame provides focused illumination. It is not bright, it flickers. Smoke may accompany it, but it extends usable hours after sunset. In northern winter, that extension matters. Daylight can be painfully short. Without artificial light, a large portion of the day would disappear into darkness. So fire and lamps create working time as well as warmth. The economic value of heat becomes clearer with every task. You notice people changing positions occasionally. Someone who has been nearest the hearth moves away because the front of their clothing becomes too warm. Another person slides into the open place. There is an unspoken circulation. The warmest spots are shared, negotiated, claimed, and surrendered. Perhaps rank matters in some households. Age may matter. Need may matter. Habit certainly matters. A person who has sat in the same place every winter evening for 30 years is unlikely to respond warmly to a visiting cousin who suddenly decides it looks comfortable. Space carries memory. The room has its own social map. Scholars still argue whether seating arrangements in Viking Age halls always reflect rigid status hierarchies, or whether everyday domestic use is more flexible than ceremonial descriptions suggest. Some written accounts from later periods emphasize high seats and ranked positions, especially in elite settings. Archaeology can show benches and internal layouts, but it cannot easily tell you who sits where on an ordinary Tuesday evening. No agreement has been reached on how strictly symbolic seating patterns govern the routine life of smaller households. The answer probably changes with wealth. occasion, and personality. A formal feast is one thing. A freezing night when everyone simply wants warm feet may be another. You look toward a group of children. They are learning by watching. One handles wool awkwardly, another tries to copy an adult shaping wood. Skills pass through repetition. There is no sharp boundary between education and household work. Children grow into competence by participating. They learn where tools belong, how close they may approach fire, how thread is spun, how leather is treated, how food is stirred without scorching, how to recognize a dangerous draught, how to behave when an elder is speaking. Winter brings generations into the same enclosed space for long periods, and that proximity supports teaching almost accidentally. A child asks a question. An adult answers without stopping work. Knowledge moves across the room as casually as conversation. One scandalous aside is that winter togetherness is probably not always peaceful. Crowded people become irritated. Children become restless. Adults argue. Smoke stings eyes. Someone makes noise when others want quiet. Someone uses too much fuel. Someone leaves wet clothing in an inconvenient place. The romantic image of a perfectly harmonious household dissolves rather quickly once you remember that actual human beings live here. Cold weather traps personalities together. Patience becomes another winter resource, yet shared warmth also reinforces dependence. No individual can easily manage every task alone. Food preparation, animal care, clothing production, repairs, fire tending, fuel gathering, and cleaning require cooperation. The household functions because labour overlaps. One person works while another cooks, another watches children, another repairs equipment, another tends the fire. Warmth makes that coordinated work possible inside a common space. You begin to hear the evening differently. The crackle of flame is only one sound among many. There is thread sliding through fingers, a spoon touching pottery, a knife shaving wood, a board game piece clicking down, soft laughter, a brief disagreement, a story rising over the room, a baby fussing, someone humming without realizing it. These are the sounds of heat being used well. The fire creates a zone where life can continue despite darkness outside. People do not merely endure winter beside it. They produce, repair, teach, eat, plan, remember, entertain, argue, rest. The room becomes busiest precisely because the landscape beyond it has become difficult. You hold your hands close enough to feel warmth without thinking about it. That may be the greatest success of the household. For a while, heat disappears from your attention. You notice the people instead, their tasks, their voices, their small habits. Warmth has done its job so effectively that it becomes background. Outside, the frozen world narrows movement. Inside, the occupied centre expands human activity. The precious heat of the house is not spent simply on comfort. It buys working hours, shared meals, repaired tools, finished cloth, transmitted knowledge, and long stretches of conversation beneath the dark winter roof. The wind changes during the night. You hear it before anyone speaks. At first it is a low pressure against the roof, almost like distant surf. Then a stronger gust arrives, and the entire building answers with a long wooden groan. Somewhere overhead, a joint shifts. A hanging object taps against a post. Fine particles drift down from the dark rafters. People stop what they are doing. For several seconds, everyone listens. This is the point where winter warmth becomes something more serious than comfort. A house can protect you from cold only while the house itself remains sound. A fire can warm you only while fuel remains. Food can sustain you only while stores last. Animals can contribute heat only while they are healthy enough to survive. The whole system depends on dozens of things continuing to work at the same time, and winter has a talent for testing all of them. You move toward the doorway and feel the pressure of the storm against it. The latch trembles. Cold air pushes through a small gap around the frame. Someone immediately wedges material into the opening. A little draft may seem trivial on an ordinary day. During a severe storm, repeated air leakage can pull heat from the occupied space continuously. The wind does not need to knock the house down. It only needs to keep stealing warmth. The household responds by becoming smaller. People gather more tightly. Doors remain closed as much as possible. Outdoor journeys are delayed unless necessary. Fuel use is watched more carefully. Activities migrate toward the most protected part of the building. The outside world becomes something you enter only with purpose. A storm can make even a familiar yard dangerous. Snow hides paths. Wind erases tracks. Darkness arrives early. A person walking a short distance to an animal shelter can become disoriented if visibility collapses. You begin to understand how geography shrinks during severe weather. The settlement may contain several nearby buildings, but a storm can make them feel far apart. The house becomes an island. Records confirm that Norse communities lived through periods of climatic variability, and their ability to withstand difficult winters depends heavily on stored resources, livestock health, local building quality, and access to fuel and food. No winter is identical. Some are mild enough to pass with manageable discomfort. Others arrive with prolonged cold, heavy snow, destructive winds, or repeated storms. A household may prepare carefully and still encounter conditions worse than expected. That is where resilience is tested. You hear another creak from above. Roof damage is one of the more frightening possibilities. Snow adds weight. Wind pulls at exposed surfaces. Moisture penetrates weak areas. Organic roofing materials decay over time. Timber can weaken. A small leak may become a larger one. If part of the roof begins to fail during a winter storm, repair becomes difficult precisely when repair is most necessary. You picture someone climbing outside into darkness, carrying tools while sleet strikes their face. This is not heroic in the Yaga sense. No poet is likely to compose verses about securing a loose roof covering with numb fingers. Yet these small acts may determine whether a household remains habitable. Maintenance becomes urgent. Temporary supports can be added. Loose material can be weighted or tied. Leaks may be caught in containers. Sleeping places and stored goods are moved away from damp areas. The goal is not perfection. It is to keep damage from becoming catastrophe. Water is particularly dangerous because it attacks warmth from several directions. Wet clothing chills the body. Wet bedding loses comfort. Wet fuel burns poorly. Wet turf can slump. Wet timber can decay. A leaking roof therefore threatens far more than the floor beneath it. You touch a drop of cold water that has fallen onto your hand. It feels almost absurdly small, but repeat that drop through hours of rain and melting snow, and small becomes significant. Winter danger often arrives through accumulation. A little moisture, a little less food, a little less fuel, a few colder nights than expected, a sick animal, one damaged wall. Each problem may be manageable alone. Together, they can push a household toward crisis. You look toward the fuel reserve. Imagine that the stack is shrinking too quickly. Perhaps the winter began early. Perhaps storms made collection difficult. Perhaps stored peat stayed damp. Perhaps a portion of the firewood was needed for emergency repairs. The household responds by rationing. The fire grows smaller. Rooms beyond the occupied centre are allowed to become colder. People wear more clothing indoors. More tasks are concentrated into periods when cooking already requires flame. Sleeping becomes longer and more bundled. Unnecessary heat is avoided, and the difference between comfort and survival becomes increasingly obvious. A warm room is pleasant. A survivable body temperature is essential. If fuel becomes scarce enough, the household stops trying to make the building feel comfortable and focuses instead on protecting people. Oddly enough, smoke can become worse when fuel quality declines. Damp wood produces more smoke. Poorly dried peat may burn inefficiently. A struggling fire encourages people to add more material, which can create thick fumes without producing proportionate heat. You sit lower as smoke drifts through the occupied area. Your eyes begin to sting. Someone adjusts the fuel. Another person checks the ventilation. The problem is frustrating because opening the building to clear smoke also releases warmth. Close it too tightly, and the air becomes unpleasant or dangerous. Open it too much, and the cold pours in. There is no perfect answer, only management. The worst winter conditions force compromises that ordinary days allow you to avoid. A strong draft may be necessary to clear fumes. A smaller fire may conserve fuel but provide less warmth. A damaged roof may need temporary ventilation changes. Each decision solves one problem while creating another. That is the true fragility of pre-modern heating. Nothing operates independently. You move toward the food stores. Here the danger becomes quieter. A house can be structurally sound and still face disaster if food runs low. Winter warmth depends on calories. Your body generates heat by using energy from food. If meals become smaller for long periods, staying warm becomes more difficult. A hungry person feels the cold more sharply because the body has less energy available. This connects food storage directly to heating. Grain, dried fish, preserved meat, dairy products, and other stored foods are not simply meals waiting on shelves. They are future body heat. You lift a container and imagine it lighter than it should be. That small change would be noticed. Households know their stores. They know how many animals remain. They know how much grain is left. They know how quickly preserved food is disappearing. As winter lengthens, the arithmetic becomes uncomfortable. Will spring arrive before the stores fail? Can portions be reduced? Can more animals be slaughtered? Can food be obtained from neighbors? Can anyone travel safely to another farm? The answers depend on weather, wealth, social relationships, and luck. A curious footnote is that winter scarcity may change cooking itself. Foods can be stretched by adding more liquid. Porridges become thinner. Stews become more dependent on grain or whatever remains abundant. Fat is especially valuable because it provides concentrated energy. A small amount can add substantial calories to a meal. In cold conditions, this matters greatly. The body does not care whether dinner is elegant. It cares whether dinner contains enough energy to keep the heart, muscles, and internal organs working. One scandalous aside is that desperation can make people eat foods they would normally reject. Spoiled stores may be sorted rather than discarded completely. Lower quality cuts become valuable. Animal feed can become a human concern if circumstances are severe enough. Pride becomes negotiable when winter begins calculating the menu. You sit beside an elderly member of the household. They are wrapped in layers and positioned carefully away from drafts. Children remain close to adults. The vulnerable receive attention because cold does not affect everyone equally. Age, illness, injury, nutrition, and fatigue all change how well a person can maintain body heat. A young, healthy worker may tolerate conditions that become dangerous for someone weakened by sickness. Care, therefore, becomes another form of winter technology. A blanket moved from one person to another. A warmer sleeping position. An extra portion of hot food. Someone checking whether a child is still warm. Someone helping an older relative change damp clothing. None of these actions leaves impressive archaeological evidence, yet they may matter as much as walls or hearths. You hear coughing nearby. Smoke exposure can make winter illness worse. Crowded indoor conditions also bring people into close contact for long periods. Respiratory infections can spread through a household. Cold itself does not create infection, but harsh conditions, poor ventilation, smoke, hunger, and crowding can combine to make sickness more dangerous. A person who becomes ill contributes less labor. That creates another problem. Someone else must gather fuel. Someone else must tend animals. Someone else must cook. If several adults are sick at once, The household's ability to maintain warmth can decline quickly. Survival depends partly on having enough healthy hands. You realise that winter danger is often less dramatic than stories suggest. It is rarely one enormous moment. It is systems weakening. A roof leak takes time to repair. A fuel shortage forces conservation. An illness removes a worker. An animal dies. A storm blocks travel. Then another storm arrives. Pressure accumulates. The household becomes less able to respond to the next problem. Scholars still argue whether severe winter hardship was a regular feature of ordinary Viking-age life, or whether archaeology and later literature sometimes exaggerate periods of crisis because extreme events leave stronger traces and stronger memories. Some researchers emphasize the adaptability of Norse farming systems and the long experience communities have with northern climates. Others point to evidence of environmental stress, livestock losses, settlement abandonment, and food insecurity in vulnerable regions. Arguments split along geography and period. A prosperous farm in a relatively productive landscape may absorb several bad seasons. A marginal settlement can be pushed toward failure much more quickly. There is no single Viking experience of winter. Prosperity matters, so does social support. You imagine a household with strong ties to neighbours. Fuel can perhaps be borrowed. Food can be exchanged. Animals can be moved temporarily. Labour can be shared during repairs. A person with few social connections faces a harder winter. Community becomes a survival resource. Hospitality, obligation, kinship, and reputation suddenly have thermal consequences. The person who helped repair your roof in autumn may be the person you help feed in late winter. Generosity is not only moral, it creates networks of mutual aid. This does not make everyone selfless. People argue over resources. Debts matter, property matters, status matters, but isolation is risky. A settlement survives more effectively when households can support one another through short-term crisis. The storm continues outside. You hear a heavy gust move across the roof from one end to the other. The flames bend. Someone steadies a vessel. Another person checks the door. Nobody panics. Experience teaches people the difference between alarming sounds and dangerous ones. That knowledge matters. Fear wastes energy. Competence focuses it. The household knows which roof beam deserves attention. Which crack is harmless? Which animal call signals distress? Which smoke pattern means the draft has changed badly? Which foods must be protected first if water enters? Winter's survival is partly about knowing what to worry about. You sit quietly and notice how every person is conserving effort. No one moves unnecessarily. Fuel is added with care. Food is portioned. Wet things are kept away from dry ones. The house feels colder than it should, but still functional. This is the edge of resilience, not comfort, not abundance, just enough. Enough flame, enough food, enough shelter, enough strength to repair what breaks, enough cooperation to cover what one person cannot manage. That word, enough, may describe many successful winters better than warmth ever could. The goal is not to create summer indoors. The goal is to remain alive and capable until the landscape changes again. You listen as the wind begins to weaken. The roof stops groaning so often. The door settles in its frame. No one celebrates. There is still work to do. A damp patch must be checked. Fuel must be counted. Animals must be inspected when daylight returns. But the building remains standing. The fire remains alive. The food stores are not empty. Around you, tired people continue breathing beneath wool and smoke. For one more night, the system holds, and in the deep cold beyond the walls, that fragile, carefully maintained balance between shelter, fuel, food, labour, and human judgment is what makes survival possible. You sit through one more winter evening beneath the dark roof, and the house begins to feel less like an artifact from a distant century and more like a machine built from ordinary materials. Not a machine with gears. Nothing turns except a spindle, a spoon, perhaps a door hinge complaining in the cold. Still, everything around you has a function. The walls slow heat loss. The roof controls exposure. The occupied space concentrates bodies. The hearth provides controllable warmth. Textiles hold heat close to skin. Stored fuel converts months of preparation into fire. Livestock turn fodder into body heat. People adjust their behavior according to weather. No single invention carries the household. The cleverness lies in combining many imperfect solutions. That may be the most important thing to understand about Viking winter comfort. There is no secret furnace hidden beneath the floor. There is adaptation. You stretch your hands toward the fire and wonder how warm this house actually feels. That simple question creates a surprisingly complicated historical problem. Archaeologists can measure a wall. They can study a hearth. They can identify burned wood. They can reconstruct a roof from post holes and surviving foundations. But they cannot ask the original occupants whether they were comfortable. Comfort leaves few traces. A person does not usually carve into a beam. Tonight the left side of the hall was pleasantly warm, though my toes remained disappointing. So modern researchers try other methods. Experimental archaeology is one of the most intriguing. Builders reconstruct houses using evidence from excavated sites, traditional techniques, and period-appropriate materials. Then they light fires, they observe smoke, they measure temperatures, they test airflow. They watch how roofs respond to weather. They learn which assumptions work beautifully and which become considerably less beautiful once rain begins falling. You enter one of these imagined experiments in your mind. Outside, the temperature is below freezing. Inside, a modest fire burns. At first the room feels cold, then people arrive. A pot begins simmering. Several bodies occupy the benches. The doors remain mostly closed. Gradually, the temperature changes. The warming may be surprisingly noticeable near the active centre, yet move only a few steps away, and the result can be very different. This is why a single temperature reading can mislead you. Where is the thermometer? Near the hearth, beside the wall, at shoulder height near the floor, in the smoke layer. At midnight, during cooking, a longhouse is not one temperature. It is a landscape of temperatures. You can be comfortable in one place and chilled in another. Records from reconstructed buildings confirm that open fires and human occupation can create usable indoor warmth, even in cold conditions, particularly when buildings are well insulated and protected from strong drafts. But usable warmth is not the same thing as modern indoor heating. You would probably keep your wool clothing on. You would value your blanket. You would choose your seat strategically. Your nose might be warmer than your ankles. And nobody would consider 18 identical degrees in every corner a basic human right. Modern expectations make the comparison difficult. You're accustomed to buildings that aim for uniform temperature. The Norse household does not need uniformity. It needs survivable zones. A cooler storage area is perfectly acceptable. A chilly entrance is manageable. An unheated corner is irrelevant if nobody spends much time there. Only the occupied areas need sustained comfort. This makes the house efficient in a way that modern architecture often avoids. You heat life instead of volume. There is also the matter of clothing. A person dressed in multiple layers of wool experiences the same room differently from someone wearing a thin, modern shirt. This seems obvious, yet it changes every claim about whether a Viking house is warm. Warm compared with what warm enough to sit still, warm enough to work, warm enough to sleep beneath heavy coverings, warm enough to remove outer clothing. The answer may change several times during the same evening. A curious footnote from reconstruction work is that visitors sometimes judge historical houses unfairly because they enter them for a few minutes wearing clothing designed for heated modern interiors. A Norse resident spends the whole season dressed for the environment. Their clothes are part of the heating system. Remove that fact, and you remove half the experiment. You pull your wool layer more closely around your shoulders. Immediately, the air seems kinder. Nothing about the room changed. You did. That is the beauty of personal insulation. It moves with you. Modern heating often warms empty space. Clothing warms only the person wearing it. From the perspective of scarce fuel, that is wonderfully efficient. You look toward the darkened ceiling. Smoke remains one of the hardest questions. Some reconstructions fill with more smoke than expected. Others ventilate reasonably well once fire size, openings, wind, and roof construction reach the right balance. Tiny design differences can produce large changes. An opening that is slightly too small traps fumes. One that is too large releases valuable heat. A roof made from materials with the wrong permeability behaves differently from an original roof. Modern safety requirements can also force reconstructed buildings to include features that historical builders did not use, so experimental archaeology is powerful but never perfect. It does not recreate the past exactly. It tests possibilities. Scholars still argue whether some longhouse reconstructions underestimate the skill of Viking builders by following archaeological remains too literally. A post hole shows where a post stood, but not every detail above ground. A foundation trench reveals a wall line, but not necessarily the exact ceiling material. Organic components disappear. Doors vanish. Roof vents leave ambiguous evidence. Interior hangings rarely survive. Small missing features can have large thermal effects. Other scholars caution against making reconstructed houses too comfortable, simply because modern builders naturally want the design to work. If you add convenient ventilation wherever smoke becomes irritating, you may accidentally improve the past. Arguments split along what should count as responsible reconstruction. Do you follow only what survives physically? Do you add features known from later northern traditions? Do you rely on practical necessity? Each method has strengths. Each can introduce assumptions. You realize that uncertainty is part of the story. The Vikings do not hand you an engineering manual. Their knowledge lives mostly in practice. A builder learns by assisting another builder. A child learns fire management by watching adults. A household notices which roof leaks. A community remembers which wall style survives storms. Useful knowledge passes through hands more often than parchment. That makes it difficult for you to recover, but it may have made perfect sense to them. Oddly enough, some of the best evidence for thermal wisdom may be the persistence of similar building ideas long after the Viking Age. Turf construction survives in parts of the North Atlantic because it works. Compact living spaces remain useful. Layered wool remains useful. Sheltered livestock areas remain useful. Banking embers remains useful. These practices endure not because people are nostalgic for hardship, but because practical systems tend to survive when they solve recurring problems. The climate keeps asking the same questions. Different generations offer variations of the same answers. You glance around the household and notice that wealth changes those answers. A prosperous family can own more textiles, more bedding, more livestock, larger food stores, better maintained structures, more labour for repairs, perhaps better access to timber. A poorer household faces thinner margins. The same winter may therefore feel very different across two farms only a short distance apart. Comfort has an economic dimension. A wealthy person cannot command winter to stop, but wealth purchases buffers against cold. More fuel means a larger fire. More wool means better insulation. More stored food means stronger bodies. More workers mean faster repairs. One scandalous aside is that an impressive Great Hall may still be less comfortable in some ways than a smaller, tightly occupied farmhouse. Prestige-like space, physics dislikes heating it. A chieftain can display authority with a vast hall, but the people at its chilly edges may quietly envy the compact household whose occupants are sitting much closer to the fire. Grandeur and warmth are not always friends. You listen to the house again. There is a quality to winter shelter that numbers struggle to capture. The emotional difference between outside and inside matters. Imagine standing in a freezing wind while snow strikes your face. Then enter a room that is only mildly warm. The temperature may not seem impressive on paper. To your body, it can feel wonderful. The absence of wind alone produces relief. Dry clothing adds more. A hot bowl adds more. Firelight adds still more. Comfort is cumulative. It is sensory. It is psychological. The Viking household experiences warmth as contrast. The colder the world beyond the door, the more valuable a protected interior becomes. You understand why the hearth carries symbolic power in so many cultures. Fire creates a visible centre. It gives people somewhere to face. Its movement holds the eyes. Its sound fills silence gently. It transforms food. It protects darkness from becoming complete. In a northern winter, those qualities become inseparable from the idea of home. Yet fire alone does not define the house. The deeper achievement lies in using heat carefully. You can see that intelligence everywhere once you know where to look. A door opens only as long as necessary. A garment dries without scorching. A bench sits where people can benefit from warmth. A sleeping place protects the body from cold surfaces. Fuel is selected according to the task. People move into warmer zones instead of demanding heat everywhere. Food and heating share the same flame. Repairs happen before small problems become large ones. The technology is ordinary enough to disappear into routine. That is often how successful technology works. Nobody wakes each morning amazed that the wall remains upright. They simply expect it to perform. You move toward the entrance and touch the latch. Cold iron presses into your fingers. For a moment, you consider opening the door. You already know what waits us outside. Darkness. Frozen ground. Perhaps a hard wind moving across snow. Inside, the light is amber and low. The difference between those worlds has been built deliberately, not by conquering winter, but by understanding it. Norse households learn that cold must be managed rather than defeated. They use shape against wind, earth against temperature change, wool against heat loss, fire against darkness, food against bodily chill, animals against empty cold space, community against failure, labour against scarcity. It is a whole system of small advantages. No part is magical. Together, they are enough. That may explain the greatest misconception about Viking houses. You should not imagine them either as freezing caves occupied by impossibly tough people, or as secretly luxurious cabins where everyone enjoys perfect comfort. Reality lies somewhere more human. Some nights are comfortable, some are smoky, some are damp, some are frighteningly cold. Some households are prosperous, some struggle, some buildings are well maintained, some roofs leak. People complain, adapt, repair, rearrange, add another layer, move closer to heat, and continue. They are not immune to winter. They are skilled at living with it, and that skill is what allows settlements to endure across landscapes where cold remains one of the strongest forces shaping daily life. The fire settles lower. You can hear individual pieces of charcoal giving tiny cracks as they cool. The room has lost some of its activity. Hands stop working, voices soften. The smell of smoke becomes gentler as the flames sink into embers. You sit quietly and understand that warmth here is never one thing. It is architecture, fuel, clothing, food, animals, labour, experience, and, perhaps more than anything else, attention. Someone always notices the fire. Someone notices the weather. Someone notices the roof. Someone notices whether the stores are shrinking too quickly. Someone notices whether another person is cold. Survival is made from noticing. The Viking winter outside remains vast, dark, and indifferent. But within this house, careful human choices have created a small island of warmth. Not perfect warmth, not effortless warmth, just enough warmth to sleep, wake, work, eat, repair, talk, and begin another day. The voices around you become quieter now, until they are little more than a murmur beneath the roof. You no longer need to examine the beams, the fire, or the dark walls. They can simply remain where they are. The embers glow softly beneath their covering of ash. Warmth rests in the wool around your shoulders and in the still air beside your skin. Outside, snow settles without hurry. The wind moves farther away. Inside, nothing asks anything from you. The tools can remain untouched. The woodpile can wait. The animals are sheltered. The door is closed, and the night has become calm. Your breathing slows with the room. The old house holds its small pocket of warmth against the cold, and for a little while, you can let it hold you too. The fire dims, the shadows soften, the winter world grows quiet, and somewhere beneath the low dark roof, you drift gently toward sleep.